tell your network.
Yeah,
That's the first step, because I think that's also the first step when you want clients.
true.
Telling your network what you're doing is a really important step to do.
Yeah.
And what helps me now is really sharing what my clients doing, the
Yeah.
sharing the wins,
Yeah.
sharing the process, sharing what a podcast can mean for your business. Yeah, so sharing, sharing a lot.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a brand new episode on the Digital Dreamers Hub podcast. My name is Trudy. I'm going to be your host today. And today we have a very amazing guest. Joining us today is Kisha, a former virtual assistant turned podcast manager extraordinaire. Her mission is to empower ambitious female entrepreneurs in their journey to launch podcast shows that not only captivate their audience, but also serve as a powerful sales tool, helping them attract clients and become the go-to authority in their industry. During our conversation today, Kisha will unveil the secrets to building a thriving podcast from the ground up. Whether you're an aspiring podcaster or a seasoned pro looking to elevate your show, Kisha's insights are going to be the golden nuggets you've been waiting for. Welcome to the show, Kisha. I'm super excited to have you here. How are you feeling?
Thank you. Wow, the introduction still. I heard it before, but I'm hearing now again. I'm like, wow.
You know, you're not the first saying this. Whenever I introduce entrepreneurs on this show, everyone is like, "Oh, I'm flattered. Thank you so much."
Yes. For
No,
sure, yes.
but this is you, and I'm very excited to hear more about your journey, the transition that you've made from, your VA business into what you're doing now. We will dive into that, but
Yeah.
also hearing more about how to really either build a podcast show from the ground up or optimize your current show, to attract your dream clients. So we're
Yes.
going to dive in. And the first thing that, I want to know, and I think a lot of people that are listening right now, is so you started a VA business and now you're a podcast manager. When and why did you decide to pivot into this business?
I will start with the when. Actually, when I started my VA business, I already knew that I wanted to do podcasting, but I didn't know what exactly.
Yeah.
So I searched on Pinterest. I normally search on Pinterest for jobs,
Yeah.
and I found podcast VA.
Hmm.
So I was interested in that, but podcast VA was more on the technical part, so
Yeah.
editing, and I'm not that strong in that, and I didn't have a technical edit background at all.
Yeah.
So for me, it was like, okay, what can I do to already start my business?
Hmm.
So I have a background as management assistant.
Okay.
So my background was actually natural to go into virtual assistant and do the general virtual assistant stuff.
Hmm.
That's how I started, and I formed my business around virtual assistant general. So I
Okay.
did finance, I did customer service, stuff like that.
Hmm.
And during the start of my business, I still went looking from, okay, how can I include podcasting in my
Hmm.
business? How can I include this? I followed a course in the Netherlands because there wasn't that much in the Netherlands. So I found a course for starting your podcast, and I was like, okay, just do it to see what the steps are. And you also know how, if you really want to do,
Exactly.
yeah, like supporting people with their podcast, you also need to know how the steps work.
Yeah.
So that's my first step that I did. So I did the course, and then eventually I found a podcast manager, because I didn't know the term. I didn't even know that it was existing.
Hmm.
Um, Through my photographer,
Oh, interesting.
I booked a photo shoot, and she also booked a photo shoot at the same photographer,
Okay.
and that's how we actually. I got her know her. I got to follow her on Instagram, and then I saw that she was a podcast manager. It was like really interesting, and she started a course. So she was just, okay, this is exactly what I need. This is exactly what I want to do. So I did that. I think the beginning of 2022, I
Okay.
started that course. Was really, yeah, valuable. I learned a lot about it. And then at that moment, I was like, okay, I'm going to start as a podcast manager. But I also was already working as a VA. So I wasn't ready to cut that loose right away.
Yeah, yeah, I understand. I
Yeah.
understand. Very interesting, and it's very clear that you followed like a path, even though you weren't even familiar with the term podcast
No.
manager. But eventually, there was like a kind of step by step approach to pivot into that new business that you're doing. But I
Yes.
know that there are a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs right now that started their first business idea, but they know that deep down inside, they know that there's something else waiting for them, but they find it very difficult to let that first idea go. So I'm very
Yeah.
curious to hear from you, like, how difficult or easy was it for you to come to terms that you're moving away, like really moving away from your VA business and
Yeah.
fully focusing on your business as a podcast manager?
Yeah, it's a good question. Also because I focused mainly on the Dutch market, and I noticed like 4 years or even 7 years ago, when I found the term virtual assistant was really unknown in the Netherlands. It was
Yeah.
an unknown term. Like
Mhm.
not a lot of people knew that was existed. So when I started in the Corona time with my VA service, a lot of people knew. A lot of people were like online working and
Yeah.
in the online business. So for
Yeah.
me, it was really okay. I'm gonna focus. I had a niche in my mind.
Okay.
I focused on that niche,
Yeah.
and it was pretty. It took me a year to let that go because
Wow.
I built up. You build up
Mm.
relationships. You build up
Eh,
your branding around the virtual assistant part.
Yeah.
So the after the course, I didn't straight away like cut ties with virtual
Yeah.
assistant and say
Mhm.
bye virtual my clients, but I knew I had to do it
Yeah.
because if you're not niche down or if you're not making decisions in your business, people don't know what do you do or
Yeah.
what can you do for me? Like it's
Yeah.
so broad.
Yeah. a hundred
So
percent.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so talking about branding, because you're mentioning that, you build your reputation around you being a virtual assistant and
yeah.
you build like relationships, which I 100% understand. So I'm curious to hear that. So eventually you did cut ties with the VA
I
business because
cut
now,
ties. Yes,
now you're doing this full time.
yes.
So I'm wondering, like, what steps did you take, or what helped you in the process of building a new brand around your name as a podcast manager? Because I can imagine that for people, that's the thing that they fear the most. Like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
starting from scratch. How do I create this brand awareness around the new thing that I'm doing? So how did you go about it?
Yeah. So what I noticed is on the Dutch market, podcast managers like really like unknown. Actually, it's
Yeah,
an unknown term again. So I'm starting from scratch. What
yeah,
you're saying, and I was like fully focused. So what I did is I started with the following step. For me, what worked is changing my Instagram account, changing my LinkedIn account, just to attract people from, hey, I'm not doing virtual assistant jobs anymore.
yeah,
I'm now focusing on podcasting.
yeah.
Telling my network that I'm doing podcasting. That was the first step because
Okay,
that's also the first step I did in virtual assistant, and
okay,
that got me the job.
yeah.
So that worked pretty well for me.
Hmm.
And then after that, all my content changed to virtual assistant. I even changed my name because I was my first business name was Assisted by KC,
Okay.
and that was focused on virtual assistant. I assisted my clients,
Hmm.
and now it's Studio Connection by
Hmm.
KC. And by KC, that part is because Studio Connection was already taken, so
Already
I
take.
had to add. Yeah, I had to add the by KC. More because somebody asked me, like, "Hey, are you still are performing under the same name, or are you going to change your name?" And I was actually even not even thinking about
Mhm.
changing my name, but
Yeah.
it was the right step for me because I wasn't assisting. people anymore. I was like the manager role. I'm
Exactly.
strategic thinking with my clients now. So I was a step level higher. So assisted wasn't correct anymore. Yeah. So that was for me the steps that I went through is like the small steps are just in your social media, change that, and then tell your network.
Mhm. Yeah.
That's the first step because I think that's also the first step when you want clients.
True.
Telling your network what you're doing is a really important step to do.
Yeah.
And what helps me now is really sharing what my clients doing. You know,
Mm.
the
Yeah.
sharing the wins,
Yeah.
sharing the process, sharing what a podcast can mean for your business.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sharing a lot of content. Yeah, I think that really helps me in how I where I am today. I mean, I have amazing clients
Yeah.
I work with, so yeah, I cannot complain about that.
Great. I
Yeah.
love that. I love the fact that you're saying like start telling your network about what you're doing, right? So that
Yes.
they can get used to you also doing that new
Yeah.
role. Also maybe telling their other acquaintances about the services that
Yeah.
you offer.
I really noticed like a lot of people on LinkedIn they tag me in other people's posts like all the things were connected with podcasting they tag me. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, you need her. You know, that's the first like if you already profiling yourself as the podcast manager of the expert of podcast, people will notice you and like if a question is coming up in their network, it's like, oh, I know somebody.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I noticed that really well. It was for me, it was working really good because also what I said before, podcast manager on the Dutch market is so small, like
Yeah.
almost nobody knows
True.
what. The main question I get is what do you do as a podcast manager?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
And to be honest, like I'm going to be 100% real here. I think I told you when we first had our conversation that I had no clue as well. I
no,
went to your profile and I was like, ooh, like it was very interesting. I was like, ooh, podcast manager, what is it about? So I was very
yes,
intrigued and that's why I reached out to you. But
yeah,
honestly speaking, like honestly, I haven't seen anyone in the Dutch market with that
but
using that name.
exactly, but that's that's also in my like. I think it's a pro for me that I
Yeah, 100%.
one of the five podcast
Yeah,
managers in the
yeah,
Dutch market.
100%.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's also the reason that I just focus on the Dutch market was because I already communicated everything in Dutch, but also I knew that it wasn't that big in the
Mm,
Netherlands.
yeah.
So I knew it's like okay, it's not that big, but podcasting is getting big.
Oh,
So I
yeah.
knew a lot of people or a lot of entrepreneurs
Yeah.
who were starting a podcast or they had a podcast. They started one in Corona time. Yeah, a lot of So I knew that it was like okay, a matter of time people will see and the value from what I was doing. So
Yeah.
a
Love
lot of
that.
those steps.
I
Yeah,
really love that. So let's dive in a little bit more because I now understand what a podcast manager does. But I can imagine that people are like, okay, tell me exactly what do you do? So Kisha, tell
yeah.
us, what do you do exactly?
Yeah. So what I do is I help my clients with achieving their goals. So what we first start with is making a strategic plan so that they reach that goal and work towards that goal. I see a podcast not only as a marketing tool, but also as a branding tool. You are the branding of your own company.
Yeah.
So your voice is also the branding of your own company.
Mm-hmm.
And I help my clients with implementing their podcast in their business, in their marketing strategy. So you have a different podcast strategy, and then you have the marketing strategy. How do
Okay.
you use your podcast to attract people,
Yeah.
to let people buy from you?
Yeah.
Because your voice is a really strong tool, and people underestimate that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what the most part. That's why what I help my clients with. So the strategic part, and then I have a package where I you just need to record, and I do everything else.
Okay.
I do the editing. I do the social media post making. I do the scheduling. I make the show notes, so the
Oh, nice.
description for Buy the Podcast. If you don't know what show notes are, so yeah, I do a lot of things, operational stuff, but needs to be done if you want a successful podcast.
Yeah.
And then after that, also I watch your message, like the strategic, like how which episode did the best, why, which guest did you work with, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then on the hand of that, we make a plan for the upcoming month. So that's the
Very
what how I
interesting.
work, and that's one of my package. So I have also one-on-one. Then you do a mentorship with me for 3 months, and then we plan out your strategic, how you build a community around your podcast, and eventually how you get clients out of your podcast, like how you get the
Okay,
money.
very interesting. Very interesting. So there are two ways that people actually can
Yeah.
like first off, it's very interesting what you're doing because you're actually handling everything from scratch, from the beginning till
Yes.
end, right?
Yes.
So, and if I'm hearing correctly, you're also like you help entrepreneurs in two different ways. Either they opt in for like a one-on-one coaching so
Yeah.
that they really get like the insights of how to really build a podcast show that attracts their dream clients, or there's a done for you service where
Yeah.
you take it away from them. So all they
Yes.
have to do is just record and you handle everything.
Yes.
Very
Exactly.
interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, who is your target audience and why did you choose that particular target audience?
This is a good question. I focus on expert on different niche.
Yeah.
So think about a web designer, a sales coach, content writer or content coach, people like that.
Yeah.
Because I noticed that those people are invested in getting the word out, and also they are like, okay, a podcast really add value. They see the
Mhm.
value from a podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, you also see the value from a podcast,
100%.
right? Yeah,
100%.
because I noticed like a lot of people who just starting out, they're like, oh, everybody has a podcast, so I'm also need a podcast. And I'm like, no, don't start a podcast if you just looking at other people or other coaches and you see they have a podcast. So I also need to start a podcast. No, you need to really be invested in it.
Okay. You really need to love to share your.
Yes. But
Yeah.
yes, because it's, you know why I like podcasting is I don't like to show my face a lot. I
Well,
this is
today you
also
are. Today you are.
no, 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 but it's okay. No, this is fine. But I mean, if you go to my Instagram or you're following me on my Instagram, I'm almost never on stories because I'm always working and I have an operational job
Yeah.
sometimes, and in the process of I don't look at great. I'm like, well, I don't feel like Instagram worthy at the moment.
Yeah.
But you will almost never see me on like on stories, and that has to do bit with I'm really introvert. I don't like to be on the
Uh,
front,
Yeah.
like up in
Yeah.
front and like, hey,
Yeah.
see me.
I get it.
Yeah, but for an entrepreneur, if you have your own company, you actually need to do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then podcast is the best
Mhm.
because I don't need to be on camera all the time. You just sit in your PJs and just record in your you want to sit in your PJs and just record in your bed if you want to. No knows and it
Exactly.
sounds better. I mean, right?
It's great.
Um
It's great. To be honest with you,
yes.
I'm gonna share something like it's because like this season I've decided to create videos with this podcast episodes as well. But usually you don't want to see me. My hair is like up. I'm wearing like maybe joggers with paint on it. My food is here. My snacks are there, and I have the podcast mic in front of me. Like I look at my worst, but literally I love. That's the moment where I feel like I can
You
really,
feel comfortable. You feel like yes,
yeah,
you're like in your zone
in
and
my
you're just
zone.
and if you're in your zone and you're comfortable, you're so easy. You're
Yeah,
gonna talk.
yeah.
And then you're gonna spill the value, what you want to talk about.
100%. 100%.
And that's the power, I think.
Yeah.
The audio is the power from podcasting.
Yeah.
Of course, now, I mean, you also doing it, but a lot of podcasts is adding
Video.
video.
Yeah.
I don't mind. I think it adds a really good marketing extra. I
Mhm.
mean, people want to see sometimes, even like if you're like just opting in for 10 minutes from the 45 minutes.
Yeah.
People just saw your face and they saw your expression. So that's also a value for your podcast.
It's-
But if you have a podcast option, and if you just have the podcast and people can listen to it everywhere,
yeah.
and they don't need to watch, they don't
True.
gonna watch. They don't need to watch because they even podcast videos that are uploading on YouTube. I think most people are watching it for 10 minutes
Yeah.
max,
And then
15, and then they just switch to back to the audio first and then just go on with your life
yeah.
because otherwise you need to sit down and watch.
Exactly. 100%. And I think what you're saying, the audio, the game changer when it comes to this tool.
Yes.
That's the
Yes.
audio. I think, in my opinion, the video is just like good for like maybe promo, creating like this buzz,
Yes.
creating promo, highlighting the snippet,
Yeah, exactly.
to get
Yes.
people really excited to tap
Yes.
in. But I
Yes.
agree with you. Like, if I think about the last podcast that I listened slash watched, honestly, the video was indeed like maybe a few minutes, and then I go on to Spotify or whatever, and then
And you switch back to
yeah, I
just
switch back.
audio.
Yeah,
And also it's sometimes it's also time consuming to just
Yeah.
sit and watch a video. That's why podcasting, you can do it everywhere.
Everywhere.
Like on the bike, in the car. I'm always listening to podcasts when I'm just walking my dog.
Yeah,
I love it. That's
yeah.
that's yeah.
It's
That's the
great.
power. Yeah.
That's the power indeed.
Yes.
So, talking about podcasting, for the past years, whether it's in the Netherlands or in the States or in the UK, I think like globally, to be
Yes.
honest, podcasting has been very,
Yeah.
very popular. Like, everyone is starting
I
a
know.
podcast. Why do you
Yes.
think this is? Why do you think? Well, you've already shared like audio as power, but why do you honestly think that everyone wants to create a podcast show to share whatever it is that they want to share?
Yeah, I think you can talk a lot more on a podcast. You can share a lot more your values, but also express your emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I listen to somebody's voice and then it's like, okay, you're like you're really excited or
Yeah.
you're really sad or you
Hear a
hear
lot.
the emotions in their voice.
Mhm.
I think that's a good way to add that at the podcast, but
Yep.
so that's, I think, one of the reasons that people want to start a podcast, but also a lot more people just going to audio because it's, I think, the one platform people really want to stay and listen for 45 minutes or an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, like if you look at TikTok, if you look at Reels, if you look at Shorts, not included YouTube, but if you look at those things, those are all 1 minute, 30 seconds, 90 minutes,
Yeah.
90 seconds
Yeah.
videos
Mhm.
because people just have a short content
Yeah.
span or
Yeah.
content span, watch span. So yeah, so audio it's easy because you
Mhm.
don't need to watch anything,
Yeah.
and it's a smart way just to educate yourself or entertain yourself because a lot of crime podcasts are big.
Really?
Those are still big. Yeah, they're really big.
Oh,
Yes.
never knew.
Crime podcasts are, I think, probably all around the world the biggest one.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Never knew that.
Yeah, it's also because I don't listen to crime podcasts. I'm more on the business podcast. So
Same here.
I listen only.
Podcast was like
No. That's really small.
really, and I feel like there's a lot when it comes to
It's
this.
a lot. There are a lot, but you also need to know that a lot of people started in the Corona time, and then they just don't finish, or just drop it, or have 5 episodes and they're done. Stuff like that. Because also a podcast is a lot of work. I mean, I think you
Yeah.
need to do following steps after
Yeah,
the podcast is
yeah,
recorded. Also before, because you're doing interviews, you need
true.
to prep. You need to,
Oh, a lot of things. Yeah.
yes,
And I think also, if I have to share my opinion, I feel like podcasting is also like a long-term strategy. You don't
yes,
need to, like, it's unlikely that your first episode will be like, oh, 1 million downloads. Like, let's be honest, right?
no,
So
no,
it takes time. It really takes time to
yes,
build that
yes,
momentum
yeah.
or that audience.
I think keep in mind if you start a podcast, you need to work towards a certain goal
Yeah.
because otherwise you're getting disappointed and
Mm,
you
yeah.
just drop it.
Yeah.
Um, and also, what I notice is that a lot of podcasters in the Netherlands, and I'm talking about big podcasters who are talking like, "Oh, it's easy, it's simple, just start, blah blah blah." Of course, I'm also pro for if you want to start, just start.
Yeah.
But don't start without a plan behind your podcast
Mm,
because they have 10,000 followers. Maybe
yeah.
you have 2,000 or
Yeah.
even less.
Even less.
So
Yeah.
you're not going to reach the same goals that they have or they sharing that they received with their
Right.
podcast.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind if you want to start a podcast. Just look at the big podcasters where they are, but just work towards that goal
Hmm.
and don't expect to start there because what you're saying it's a long term, it's just
Yeah.
like SEO
Yeah.
long term.
True. True. It takes
Yeah,
time. Yeah.
yeah.
And do you feel like every starting entrepreneur should start a podcast? Well, let's say they have a plan.
Yeah.
But do you still feel like everyone, especially in the industry of whether coaching or online service providers, need to have like a podcast? Do you feel like right now it's almost a must? Why or why not?
Yes, is for me a must is to pivot your content strategy. I mean, start with the podcast and track through that. So the start is the podcast, and then you pull all the little bits of content out of your podcast. That's an easy way to create a good, simple podcast of not podcast, but content strategy
Okay.
for your and includes your podcast.
Yeah,
Because I think in a podcast you just spill more information than you can ever do writing or
true. Yeah,
right. Because also sometimes you only can add 300 signs,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
not more.
Very
And then you, of course, you can do your newsletter. But yeah, that's the reason for me that I think it's if you pivot your podcast or your content strategy to start with your podcast and then pull out of the little bits that you want to discuss more in content for the Instagram and LinkedIn
Yeah,
and other platforms. Of course, just do that. And why not is I don't feel like that everybody is ready or not everybody is made for podcast.
okay.
I mean, some people just yeah, how can I say this nicely? It's like some people are just more like I mean, some people are just more with written or on other platform. I don't think all the marketing platforms are for everybody.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I get that. And what makes a podcast successful? Because, okay, like when is a podcast successful? How do you measure success? Sometimes I feel like there's not really a black and white thing
No.
to follow.
Yeah.
So how
This
would
is
you
a
guys,
difficult
yeah,
yeah,
how would
this
you
is a
guys
difficult
explain this to
question.
us?
Yeah, success is I think for everybody different.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a difficult question because one really wants a sponsor, one wants 1,000 followers a month. It depends what you want to get out of your podcast, and then you can define. Okay, this is a success for me.
Yeah.
What I focus on is mostly getting clients out of the podcast. Like,
Okay.
how do you get clients out of the
Yeah.
podcast? Because why else do you do the podcast?
Mm-hmm.
For your business,
Yeah.
why else would
Yeah.
you start a marketing tool extra next to all the other things you already have
Yeah.
just to talk? Yeah, of course you want to build a community with people, but also you want them to buy something.
It's
You
true.
want to promote your stuff that you're doing and you want to talk about it. You want people just to join you or just book a strategy call or an match call. I don't know what's called. But just to talk to you and eventually your service that they buy from you.
Yeah.
So that's why I focus on. But I don't see that per se as the only success. So if your success level is focused on I want to build a community, then that's your success. You
Mm.
know, that's why it's a difficult question because it's different for everybody. But I think if you're using your podcast for business, then I feel it's a success if you at least get one client per month out of your podcast
Mm.
and they buy something. You know, that they work with you.
Yeah. And how can you measure that? Like, is there a way that you can find out that maybe this client, this prospect that booked a match call or downloaded your ebook or
Yeah.
whatever is coming through your podcast? I feel like sometimes
Yeah.
it's very hard to.
Yeah. So what a good thing is to do is I'm not sure like this is how I'm doing it is I have a form that people
Okay.
need to fill in.
Yeah.
So before they book a match call, they need to fill in a form and then they can say,
Mm,
I
yeah.
my reference is that I found you
Mhm.
through
Mhm.
the podcast
Yeah.
or I found you through
It's,
Instagram.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sense.
that's something that I really recommend is that people add that or start using a form that you or ask them in the calls and
Mm.
register that afterwards. So that's one of the things that you can do, but also the links that you said how can I measure the people downloaded my ebook or something
Yeah. Yeah.
because of the link of the podcast. Make a different link for your ebook that's directly linked to your podcast.
Mm.
Then you can measure things. Or you need to do a different call to action and say, hey, are you interested in having a call with me? Or do you want send me a DM?
Mhm.
And just with a word, like
Mhm.
podcast,
Yeah.
for instance.
Yeah. That's
Then you
also.
can measure.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's are the measure things that you can implement for
It sounds very straightforward. Like I haven't really paid attention to it, but it's actually pretty straightforward on how you can measure where if the people are coming through your podcast or not.
yes.
So very
Yeah.
thank you so much for
Yeah.
doing this. Yeah.
Yeah, because also the most like coaches that tell like, oh, I got a lot of out of my podcast. The first thing they hear during a sales call is like, oh, I found your podcast or I listened to your podcast. Like even if people are already admitting in the call, I listened to your podcast, you know that that's the link
Mhm.
for them to book call.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And how should you use, and I think this is like the $1 million question, right? How do you use your podcast to make sales? Because as you said already, that if you're an entrepreneur, honestly speaking, your focus, if you're starting a podcast, your focus should be like trying to get at least like one client out of your
Yes.
podcast. So, how should you use podcasts to make sales or implement it as a sales strategy? Do you feel like you should use it in a different way, use a different format? Like,
I
what?
think
Yeah,
yeah,
tell us.
yeah. For podcast, I think podcast is a good channel to build the know, trust, like factors.
Mm,
So it's a really nurture factor that you
yeah.
can implement. And how you do sales wise is yeah, this is gonna sound cheesy, but promote your products in the podcast. So a good call to action, a good intro with a call to action. A lot of people nowadays don't listen actually to the outro, but still, the outro is also important to do a call to action. What do you want them to do? And most people promote the podcast, like give me a review, give me, give me a shout out.
Yeah.
But you can also promote your service. You can
Mhm.
also promote, and that's how you use your podcast as a sales channel. And also, what a lot of good coaches do to use their podcast for is frequently ask questions.
Mm.
episodes for frequently asked questions about a certain service that they just promoted or just launched, talking about the service that they just launched, making a podcast episode. Why did they launch this? Why is this important for you? Talking about your product in the podcast is important because people, maybe they know you, but they don't know what you do.
Yeah.
They follow you just for the visual
Mhm.
or sometimes the tips that you're sharing.
Yeah.
But if you really want them to buy from you, you need to promote your service all the time. And what I recommend is just do it in periods from 3 months or quarterly,
Okay.
and then see what takes them from, oh, they just download my ebook again, or they booked a call because they want to have a sales call with me, stuff like that.
Yeah. And do you feel like talking about, promoting your services or talking about your services, should it be done every single episode? In your
It
opinion?
depends. Like if you're in a launch, then yes, I would make a rakes of your service. So the launch, just make a few episodes, like I would say 10 or 5 or something like that. And just divide it in different episodes, like behind the scenes, how it went through your mind to involving or like making this service. What's the service? What's it's gonna help them with and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then frequently ask questions is really important, and because you just ask your audience,
Yeah,
your people, what they want. So
exactly.
that's also a good one. And you include them in the podcast, of course, always nice.
True.
So I think because I listen to one of the podcasts I listen to is from Natasha from Shine Online. She's a video editor,
Mhm. Yeah.
and she makes I think it was 5 or 6 episodes from her camp course. So she
Oh,
has a camp course and she launches it every, I think, twice a year or
okay.
twice or 3 times a year. And then she makes the episodes. She makes episodes about it from what's in the course, what do you get, stuff like that. And it's
Mm,
really, I never joined the course, but I mean, it's really interesting to see like what her process is and how she thinks about this. And actually, I went on her sales page like 1,000 times. It's like every time it's like, should
oh,
I? Should
yeah,
I? And
yeah,
not even into video making, but I'm like already on. Oh,
yeah,
you telling me this? Maybe it's interesting to
yeah,
buy, or
yeah.
and
That's
that's what you're tracking if you just talk about your product in the in your podcast. I
and
mean, it's of course you want the podcast to share information and tips and things that it's useful for your listeners, but also you need to think about strategically about, okay, but what is it like, what I want something out of it, what's my goal? I want one client a month, then I need to do this.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Very interesting. And a very interesting tip that you're giving, like break it down. Like when you're launching, break it down in, frequently asked question, what you get. Like I've never thought about
Frequently
it in
ask
that way.
questions is the
It's a
best.
game changer. Yeah, very.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's very interesting that you're talking about this podcaster. I feel like Americans are more shameless when it comes to promoting their business. Like
Sure.
they are shameless because I don't listen to
Yes.
Dutch podcasts that often, but when I do, like
It's nothing like that.
it's
No.
nothing like that.
No,
Like
I agree. Yeah, no, the Dutch market can be shameless, like more shameless
yeah,
on
yeah,
that level,
yeah,
because I think that's also the reason that a lot of podcasters in the Netherlands feel like, ah, a podcast is just a burden, or I don't want to go through with it, or it's not a priority for me, because
yeah.
a lot of podcasters say that, or not podcasters, entrepreneurs say that.
Mhm.
They start out or they have the idea to start out and they don't follow through
Yeah,
because it's eventually it's a lot of work and they don't get something for it.
yeah.
But then you don't doing it right because you need to promote what you're selling, and otherwise nobody knows. They just listen to the tips you're giving them
Yeah,
and your mind and your learnings, but they don't know what else
yeah. What's
after.
in there?
Yeah,
Yeah.
what else can we get from you? So I know that like another podcast that I listen to is a podcast about podcast managers. And what she does for also for promotional stuff is that she promotes a masterclass. It's a free masterclass, but she promotes it as Advent
Hmm.
through her just in the middle of talking is like "Blah," and then it goes like
Yeah.
her, yeah, her saying from, hey, I know that you're here, blah blah blah. uh, if you want to join the math class, sign up. Okay. So I have listened to this podcast for I think 10 times. The first time I heard it, it was like, I'm not gonna do that. That's
Yeah.
interesting. The 10th time I signed up for
See?
sure. I signed up and I went to the master class. I mean, that's why it's important to have a call to action that's coming back all the time. Because also she has a Facebook group and she has it in the outro. And I actually never again listened to the outro, but I heard it in the beginning because then I listened a podcast from beginning to end, and I heard that she had a Facebook group. I was like, no, I'm not gonna do it because I was walking outside, so I'm not behind my laptop. I'm not gonna,
Yeah, sign up.
um,
Yeah.
yeah, go back inside and just sign up. So I think 3 weeks ago, I heard the outro again. For after like I listened to her podcast for a year and a half now, and I heard it again. I was like, you know what?
Let's
Why not? I know I'm in the Facebook. But that's the power from repeating
Oh yeah.
something because it's
Yeah.
the same with like commercials on the TV. You
100%.
how many times you need to see it for maybe you're like, you know what? Maybe
Yeah.
I'm gonna try it.
Yeah.
You need to be
100%.
triggered. Yeah.
I got over the fear of repeating myself. In the beginning, I was also like, I don't want to repeat myself. Like it's annoying.
Yeah.
It's like it can be annoying, but if it's annoying, people will switch. Like people will skip, right?
Exactly.
But
Yes.
most of the time, people need it to remember because we are bombarded with so much information.
I
So
know.
now I'm like, it's still a work in progress. I'm not gonna say I'm perfect, but I do it more often, like repeating myself. And to be honest with you, you see you see immediate result. Also with your freebie
Yes.
and stuff, when you repeat it,
Yes.
more
You
people
need
sign.
to repeat it. Yes. And
More
but
people.
this is also I just recommend to make one intro or one or two intros if you like. One for with your guest, one for your solo, and whatever, and then one like outro with a clear call to action, and then use that for 3 months. See what you get,
Yeah.
and then change it up. But
Yeah.
I mean, you don't need to always. A lot of people are like, okay, I'm just saying at the end my call to action. Sometimes you forget. Sometimes it's not clear. And if you change it up a lot after every episode, people are not I'm not gonna remember like what do you want again
Yeah.
want
Yeah.
again?
Yeah.
I don't know. Last week was this or not even that, but like it's not clear because I need to hear it for I don't know, 10 times maybe, 11,
Yeah, that's
20.
true. So how can
Yeah.
people find you, Kisha? Like how can people follow you on Instagram? Where are you on Instagram? And if they really want to work with you, how can they find you basically? Can you share more about
Yeah.
how people
Yeah,
can
of
get in
course. They can find me on Instagram under Studio Connection by Casey. I am always on online. So if you want to send me a DM, I would love to just shout me out. And I'm also a lot on LinkedIn.
touch?
And on LinkedIn is my name Kisha Canwood. So that's pretty easy.
I'll put it in the
um,
show notes as well so that
yes,
people can
yes,
send you a
yeah,
connection request. Anything
yeah.
else that you want to share? Like other
Yeah,
places?
maybe I have a freebie. It's a checklist. So maybe for all the people who want to start a podcast and like are still interesting after my rambling, um, you can download the freebie. It's free and it has a checklist in it. Yes.
Very
So I
good.
think
I'll
it's
add it in the show note as well. So
Yeah, of
I want to thank you. First and foremost, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for all the
course.
golden nuggets that you shared with us in regards to, podcasting and how to implement it to be, to stand out in your market and also to, get your ideal clients to hear about you. So thank you so much.
Yes.
And thank you
Yeah,
for
of
all that
course.
are tuning in today. I will catch you next time in the next episode.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.